Hello everybody and welcome back once again. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster, and today I have something very special indeed to show you. We have a new faction showcase that is going to be the Elves of Mithrim. This is the newest faction to join the Silmarillion Total War multiplayer lineup. They will also be present in campaign, however, you will not be able to play as them. Sorry about it. That's just how it's going to be, at least for the time being. Yeah, a little bit about the Elves of Mithrim. We'll go into that once we get to their side of the field, but first, let's take a look at their opponents today. That is going to be a double Assyrian combination, so it's 2 Assyrian versus 2 Mithrim. The first player for the Green Elves is going to be Steward, or Stewie of Dale, whatever you would prefer. He's brought some Outriders of Dweilwyn, which is a nice armor-piercing Lancer/Spear Cavalry. They have medium armor, and they are very, very quick, and they're able to hide in many places. Other medium cavalry will not be able to. Next we have the Lancers of Adurant. They are a non-armor-piercing variant of the Lancer. They don't have the same power versus monsters or other cavalry, but they do have a really good melee defense pool, and they're extremely fast. So there's a lot of potential applications for them on the battlefield. You'll see some of that today. We have some Spear Host of Gelion, Urfanen Tower, I believe at least two units of the Scouts of Gelion. We've got Randirum, who just disappeared into the woodwork. Hunters of Rathloriel, I believe 2 units of. They are a Spear Harassment Javelin hybrid unit. We've also got some Skirmishers of Rathloriel and some Spearmen of Rathloriel to round out the rest of the build. In addition to all of that, we've also got some Sentries of Gelion. I believe at least 2, possibly... yeah, probably around 2 or so units of them, so an okay amount of cavalry here. And that is pretty well going to do for Steward's army. I think he also has some of the Urfanen Tower, maybe a second unit of them hiding around somewhere. More Spear Host to protect himself, and the Randirum have been shifted out here on to this flank. Let's move on now to his ally. He's got some Kinsmen of Denethor, Spearmen of Rathloriel. They're going to be hiding in the tall grass there. I've also got Skirmishers, Spear Host of Gelion, who are able to hide anywhere when you pop them into loose formation. Fun little fact for you. A couple units of them there, backed up with some Skirmishers. Hiding in the woods over here, you can see some Urfanen Tower. I think there's at least 2 units of them in there, so 2 full companies. Thunderous Fox also has the monstrous Ents on the field today as well, and they are one of the few monstrous units, in fact, the only one that is able to hide, with the exception, I think, of the Avaran Elves' grandfather. I believe that they can hide as well. Spear Host of Gelion here as well. They make a nice little anti-cavalry cloud that you can hide in various places. Spearmen of Rathloriel, and in addition, we've got some Mythern and Tol Galen, who probably have their armor upgrade. I think that does it for the majority of his army. No, we actually do have some cavalry over here, so some Sentries of Gelion. Looks like 2, maybe 3 full units of. They can be very, very strong and extremely obnoxious. One of my favorite units in the game, in fact. The Green Elves are actually my favorite faction to play. I find them very engaging, fairly difficult. There's a decently high skill ceiling on them. We'll see how these 2 players manage to do today. That is going to do for the Green Elves of Assyrian. Let's go ahead and pop on over to the Mithrim side of things. And now for the part of the video where things slow down mightily. I'm going to talk all about the Mithrim faction, all about the various capabilities of their units, so that moving into the new patch, you have an idea of how they can play, what their capabilities may be. I will iterate all of this in a big patch release video, so if you want to skip, I suppose you can. But it's a new faction, so why would you do that? Anyway, Grey Elves of Mithrim being played, at least on this part of the field, by Alexander 10Q. He has brought some Sentries of Mithrim. Now, one of the big standout features of Mithrim is their big ol' shields. A little bit like how our dwarves are going to act, except they're a little bit more focused on their shields and range combat, whereas the dwarves will be more focused on artillery and shields plus armor, and then very low melee defense. So that's one thing that they both factions have in common, is their lower melee defense. So they trade melee defense for these very big, strong shields, which actually will serve them quite well in this matchup against Assyrian, because Assyrian is not just going to be able to pick them off from the front, they're going to have to make very concerted efforts to try and outflank them, get those beautiful enfilades, rear shots if they can, and things like that. And the Mithrim close quarters roster is much, much more fearsome than that of Scions, which is mostly spears and a few sword units mixed in. The Scions of Mithrim have some pretty nasty tools at their disposal, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those once we encounter them in their army compositions. But for now, the Scions of Mithrim are your sort of bog standard spearmen. A lot of mid-tier units in the Mithrim roster, only a couple of high tiers, and a couple of bodyguard options, and very, very limited cavalry. So mostly things do kind of center around their mid-tiers, and getting good, efficient trades, and picking strong engagements that are going to favor your weapon type and your quality, etc., are going to be a big part of playing with the Scions of Mithrim. So they're going to match up quite nicely against the Scions, which is largely balanced in the same way. Next we have some Sword Bearers of Mithrin. The thing to note about the Sword Bearers is that unlike most sword units, they actually have a pretty decent charge. They come in at, I think, about 5, and they've got okay-ish melee defense. I think they clock in at about 8 or so melee defense, and they've got a decent enough base value of 7, which you can upgrade to 10 through attack upgrades and so forth, which will cost you a little bit of extra money, about 40 or so florins, or mirian as we're calling it now. So that in tandem with the charge bonus can actually make these, halfway decent shock troops, allowing them to get a little bit of damage off the impact, which is going to serve them well moving into that sort of grindier engagement where those large shields are going to lend them a decent amount of survivability. So we've got a couple of those units here. We've also got some of the Shore Riders of Mithrim. Now, cavalry is not something that Mithrim does particularly well. They've got the Shore Riders, of course, and then they've got a legendary company variant, but that's basically it. The Shore Riders are a nice little dual-purpose unit. They're sort of a lighter variant of the mounted company of Kurufin. They've got less armor, less melee defense, as many of the Mithrim mid-tiers especially will have. But they've got that big shield in their corner. In addition to all of that, they've also got some harassment javelins. And their harassment javelins do hurt. You are going to notice it when you get hit by them. I think they're maybe a little bit stronger than the average. I could be misremembering that, though. But it does clock in at around 3 to 4 damage, which is also armor piercing. So they can help whittle down enemy units from afar. You can bring 3 of them, so you can deploy them not quite en masse. It will cost you, of course, to use them as well. But yeah, they're not too bad. They're melee cavalry, so they have good bonuses against cavalry and decent bonuses against elephants, and they're also axe-armed, so they've got that extra charge value similar to the shield bearers. So they can serve a bit of a dual purpose, but there is a variant of them that we're going to see a little bit later on. Next we have the Scions of War. Now, from what I understand, these are meant to be the Grey Elves of Mithrin who took in Tuor during his sort of quest to find Gondolin and deliver salvation to the elves who lived therein. In Silmarillion Total War, you're going to see them as light infantry. They've got 2 HP. There's not a whole lot of them in at the unit, only about 30, and they've got very, very light armor. What they do have in their corner is that they are relentless, they are armor piercing, and they've got those massive shields there, which is going to help them survive quite nicely in melee. And they can be very, very strong, especially when you're mixing them in with some of the more numerous Mithrim mid-tier units. There is a lot of synergy there. You pop them in there with the Mithrim mid-tiers, and they can just absolutely destroy things. And because of how they look, it's very nondescript, and it's quite a small unit. It's very easy to miss this unit on the battlefield. And you won't even know that they're there until they chew through your lines. So a lot of damage, armor piercing, and a decent amount of survivability in melee, but obviously they have a vulnerability to missiles that can get around their shield value from the front. Over here we have some Hunters of Mithrin. They are going to be a mid-tier javelin men, and they have hunter javelins, meaning that they are best used against small numbers of heavily armored infantry, or against elephant class units such as the Ents, for example, that you're going to see on the battlefield today. There's going to be 2 of them here from Alexander, a couple more of the Sword Bearers of Mithrim, got some more sentries, and then out in front we have one of the more important aspects of this faction. Now, when they were designed to have limited range capacity, but also to be very, very strong at range. Now, the Eagle-Eyed of Androth are one of 2 high-tier units in the Mithrim faction. They have very high range, and they've got very strong missile velocity. So when it comes to a skirmish fight, their arrows are actually going to meet their targets more quickly than the opposing factions will, which sort of sounds like a little bit of a gimmick, but when you're in a skirmish fight and it's very, very heated, and your units get shot in between their reloading animations, such as the Eagle-Eyed of Androth are very much able to do better than any other archer, then those units will die, and you don't get that little bit of extra firepower. So it is something that will stack up over time, but you're not necessarily going to notice it right away, and if they're heavily outnumbered, then you're not going to have the time necessary to really see the value of that extra velocity. That being said, lots of range on them, so it is quite easy for them to kind of get the drop on other archers, which is interesting when you're playing with Assyrian, who are normally the faction that has that ranged advantage, and they're the one getting the drop on the other archers, but not in this case. So 2 Eagle-Eyed of Androth on the field today. I think that is going to do. Now we're going to be getting into the other faction here. This is going to be Waffles. He is playing as the Grey Elves, of course, and this is the other cavalry variant that I spoke of earlier. This is the legendary company for the Elves of Mithrim, and it is called the Bannerettes of the Hither Shore. The basic idea behind them is that they are a small detachment sent by the nearby Noldor of Hithlum to the support and succor of their Sindar neighbors. Now, I don't believe that there's any sort of lore basis for them. We were just looking for something to add a little bit of extra utility. Now, they're quite expensive, but they are a very, very strong light cavalry unit. They've got about 5 armor, which their mail there would kind of suggest. Strong shield values, and they also benefit from the Fingolfin sword bonuses, so they will have a bunch of melee defense as well, allowing them to be relatively survivable and to get a decent amount of cycle charges off before they inevitably expire. This is the only Lancer unit in the Mithrim faction, so if you want to bring it with you, you are going to have to pay for the utility, of course. But that being said, I've seen people use them quite a lot, and they can be very, very strong. Down here we have some more of the Hunters, and then we get into a new unit here. This is the Hewing Guildsmen of Androth. Now, one of the big standout features of the Elves of Mithrim is the introduction of a new weapon type, that being the Matic. So if you want to take a look at their weapon here, it's sort of a mix of a axe and a pick. The Elves of Mithrim are, of course, craftsmen, miners, and delving into the hills around the shores of Lake Mithrim was sort of their hobby, their love, and the central sort of guiding principle behind a lot of their culture and their daily sort of comings and goings. And so they've taken that weapon, what is essentially a tool, and turned it into a weapon of war. Now, units armed with Matics get a whole bunch of different bonuses. I believe they get extra weapon or movement speed. They also get increased damage, and they have armor piercing. So bringing them is obviously a choice that you need to make. They will be a little bit more expensive, and they're a little bit less numerous, of course, than many of the other units. Most of the other units, I think, come in at about 140, 145 or so size. The Hewing Guildsmen of Androth are a high-tier unit, so they are going to cost, a high-tier price tag. That being said, with a lot of the mid-tier units becoming a little bit more expensive, they are fairly affordable, and it's worth noting that they are the only Elves of Mithrim unit that I can think of off the top of my head. I think it's really just them that can upgrade their armor. So they can go from 7 to 9, which is going to bump them into that sort of heavy infantry, and then you can really only bring 2 of those. So in terms of overall numbers, there's not a lot of them. There's a hefty price tag associated with them, but they're extremely strong and a really good pick when you have to deal with a lot of armor, or when you have to deal with monsters like the Ents on the field today. Out in front of them, we're going to have some more sentries, and then we get in to the Elders of the Twilight Hearth. And Waffles has actually opted to bring 2 of them. They are a hybrid unit, obviously. Very limited ammunition, but they do have some additional bonuses against elephants in particular, which makes those spears, pardon me, particularly deadly. Sorry about that. That being said, they're not pikes and they're not halberds, so they're not going to just flatten elephants that come into contact with them, but it is something that gives you a little bit more utility. And again, these are units that synergize quite nicely with the mid-tier roster of Mithrim. You can mix them in with other units, they can support each other, you can support your infantry blobs against getting bombed by, say, elephants and kicked to death, smashed under heel, and just burnt and fricasseed beyond all recognition. So the Elders of the Twilight Hearth are quite nice with that, and they also have shield value as well, so you can use them as sort of early supremacy skirmishing. You don't really have to worry too much about them, and of course, being spear-armed, they're not too afraid of getting caught out by cavalry. Waffles is also going to have another couple units here of Eagle-Eyed of Androth. He's opted to deploy them up here on this cliff, which is sneaky, very sneaky indeed. However, there's not a whole lot of places to go. So if the Green Elves are to kind of close on them, then they would just simply get shot to death. They're up here, it's very exposed. Or if the Green Elves manage to get this little rampart in behind them, then they'd really have nowhere to go. I think that's most of the roster for the Green Elves. There are still, of course, a couple of units that we haven't seen. One of them is a mid-tier archer unit, and the other one is... Actually, it's on the field today. It's the Outlaws of Hithlum, but you'll see them a little bit later. They're sort of a detachment, like a specialized detachment. They've got some throwing axes, and they've got two-handed spears, and they're meant to be the sort of remnants of the House of Hador post Battle of a Numbered Tiers. And they have some interesting utility that they can bring to the faction that helps them deal with cavalry and with monsters a little bit better. But without any further ado, let's jump into this battle. Hope you guys enjoy it. And the battle is going to open up here with the initiative being taken by Obsidian. You can see Thunderous Fox moving forward here with a couple of his sentries of Gelion. If I were a betting man, and I am, it's kind of a problem, he's probably looking to go for that encirclement, if at all possible. That being said, Mithrim has, of course, taken up a nice little defense position here, and they're going to just have a few of these little choke points here to kind of block off. It's going to be interesting. You definitely don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're surrounded on multiple sides by Obsidian, especially as a faction like Mithrim, whose armor values are not super high, at least on most of their units. You can kind of get shot to death. It's a little bit like... what is it? Is it Carai, where the Romans were surrounded by the Parthians and basically shot into tiny little pieces? Yeah, it can end up being something similar to that. So we'll see how the Grey Elves kind of deal with that. If they can defend these chokes here, then obviously Obsidian's going to have a very difficult time. They could very easily bounce off the sort of heavily shielded front line of Mithrim. Yeah, interesting to see. So the Sentries of Gelion are a really powerful horse unit, probably one of the more damaging and potentially underrated units for Obsidian. They can get hundreds upon hundreds of kills, and I'll show you a game a little bit later where Obsidian does very, very well with these even in close quarters. But they are, of course, very, very squishy. So that is something that Mithrim rather is going to be able to exploit. Shore Riders of Mithrim here only have to get within 100 meters, and they can start to open fire, and then the Sentries of Gelion will simply wither away and die, which you don't want to have happen. Again, super important unit. Popping on over to the other side where Steward of Dale looks to be taking up position, trying to surround and outflank the Elves of Mithrim. I think, yeah, Eagle-Eye of Androth getting a decent amount of pot shots off here. You can see a few of the lighter, probably skirmishers. No, Hunters of Rathloriel, in fact, have gone down there, about 3 or so of them. And Steward of Dale taken to the offensive here with quite a large contingent of the light Rathloriel units. So we've got the skirmishers here mixed in with the spearmen. Just an all-around nice little lightly armored force here. And he's going to be taking this larger area up in behind. And if you look at the mini-map there up in your top right, you can see that Mithrim is rapidly becoming surrounded, which again isn't something that you want to have happen when you are facing off against Obsidian, especially when a couple of your higher tier archer units are a little bit trapped up here and not able to respond swiftly to the advance and encirclement being threatened by the Green Elves in this case. So we have here Bannerettes of the Hidden Shore, just kind of hanging out for the time being. We are going to see them jump into the action at some point during this game. Let's see, we got Spearmen of Rathloriel lining up here, presenting a little bit of infantry menace to the Sentries of Mithrim. That being said, I think in a 1v1, the Spearmen of Rathloriel would probably lose that fight. I could be mistaken, but I think the heavy shield values in particular of the Spearmen is going to be the decisive factor. Now, Thunderous Fox trying to push across this this muddy area. You can see as his units enter that, they are going to slow down. And let's see how Alexander decides to respond. Shore Riders of Mithrim being thrown forward, and if they manage to get in here, honestly, they could probably hack their way through a good half of these sections of Gelion. There are 2-3 units in there. Oh yeah, they'd be very, very hard-pressed indeed to take these guys on in close quarters. They're going to manage to get a few pot shots up there. These very fragile sentries, a handful of them or so, are going to fall and be left dead on the battlefield. Spearmen of Rathloriel hiding out over here. They are able to hide in long grass, so Alexander probably needs to be a little bit cognizant of that, try and memorize the enemy position so he doesn't get himself stuck into a line of spearmen. The short riders of Mithrim, but certainly not thanking for that. Turner's Fox now moving back with these horse archers, playing a little bit of a cat and mouse game here. But yeah, those harassment javelins definitely did a number on those troops there. I think he ended up losing about 8 models or so in total. It looks like things are kicking off over here. A big offensive from the Green Elves. Skirmishers of Rathloriel lining up like the Redcoats, taking aim, making ready, and firing into their enemy. Swordbearers here going toe-to-toe with the Spearmen of Rathloriel. They should win this fight fairly handily, but there are quite a lot of Green Elves here, and of course the Spearmen have very high melee defense, and that's going to serve them very well in this opening engagement. That's going to help them grind these sword units down slowly through attrition. Hunters of Rathloriel and get more Spearmen taking position over on the left flank, and these Hunters are in an excellent spot to rain down death and destruction here in a beautiful enfilade. That being said, both Javelin units, Hunters of Mithrim here, and the Hunters of Rathloriel, I believe, are exchanging fire. Actually, those Hunter Javelins going after the Urfinen Tower, starting to take its toll for sure. Urfinen Tower, when they're spread out like this, they will minimize that damage somewhat, but they are quite heavy in the formation depth department, of course. Missile units are going to shoot at the center of your line, so you want to be able to stretch that out as thin as possible in this kind of situation, but unfortunately Stewart's options are a little bit limited here. Meanwhile, yes, this big, juicy line fight. I think that's definitely going to be our screenshot for the day. There we are. And Mithrim in this kind of situation, especially with the hewing Guildsmen of Androth mixed in there, they are going to win a straight-up slog fight. Urfinen Tower, kind of the ace in the hole here for the Elves of Mithrim, one of their few truly damaging infantry units. And they've taken well over half casualties now, about 60% or so casualties, and it is just continuing to mount. Now, these Hunters of Mithrim have taken a beating themselves, of course, but was it worth it? At what cost, I ask? Urfinen Tower are quite an expensive infantry unit. Over here, sentries, outriders, a whole bunch of nasty stuff managing to get in behind the lines. And if they can get some clean charges off, these outriders will look like they took a little bit of damage on the way in, but if they can get some clean shots off, well, things are going to be ugly. Let's see how they do here. Ooh, smashing into those hewing Guildsmen. Not doing as much damage as I think he expected them to do. That's because the sentries of Mithrim here were able to body block a little bit, so many of them died in the stead of the hewing Guildsmen of Androth. That being said, I think 3, 4, 5 models maybe went down. Some nice little rear charges here from the sentries of Gelion. If you're not careful, this can be very ugly, and even the sentries can devastate your more lightly armored units here. And they actually managed to break some of Waffle's units. Things not looking great here for the Elves. There's a opportunity here for the Green Elves to surge through here. Waffles is going to be on top of it though, bringing in those hewing Guildsmen. He should be able to stabilize this situation and plug up this gap in his line. Meanwhile, over on this side, looks like it's all quiet here on the eastern front, at least for the time being. Thunderous Fox is taking his time, slowly but surely advancing towards the enemy's center. Now, over here, looks like things are still very much a stalemate. More of the Green Elves here looks like they were taken down by likely some javelin fire from the Shore Riders. The Eagle Eye of Androth are over here as well. Of course, Alexander has his full contingent of archers over here, and so he probably did a little bit of damage to the Green Elves, and that's certainly going to give Thunderous Fox something to think about. You don't necessarily want to advance into a choke point with those nasty archers nearby, especially as the Green Elves. Maybe as the Sons of Feanor or as Angband, you can kind of soak up that damage, but certainly not as Sidian, who are very, very fragile comparatively. Meanwhile, over here, it's kind of going back and forth as both sides commit more and more reserves to the fray. Looks like these Hunters of Rathloriel over here have run out of ammunition, and they were being thrown into infantry combat, but now they're going to be used as a screen to try and either catch out or screen out these shore riders of Mithrim. Scions of Gelion over here, just really hard put to it. I think there's some archer fire and things like that that may be coming in as well. Looks like both of those units we saw on the other side of the shore riders of Mithrim are here to menace that green elf left wing. And if they can get behind here and start smashing things apart, well, this is very, very quickly going to turn into an ugly, ugly rout in favor of Mithrim. That being said, looks like Tundra's Fox is sending some reinforcements. So Spearhost of Gelion here, a full power company, and some scouts of Gelion. Oh, sorry, the Randirum in Togoland, rather. These are the Rangers. They do have body-piercing projectiles, which can be super, super nasty against Mithrim, especially with a nice little enfilade. Now, it looks like that's what Tundra's Fox is going to try and go for. That being said, this left wing is kind of wide open in favor of the Grey Elves. They can certainly smash this close the second that Tundra's Fox tries to reposition those archers in such a way that he can be a true threat to them. If they're just firing from the front, it's not really going to make all that much of a difference, as I believe they only do about 5 or so, pardon me, body-piercing damage, and you're matching that against 9 or so shields, so almost double. So Tundra's Fox is going to need to get himself into position over here, enfilade, and maybe even try and get into the rear with those Rangers, but doesn't look like he's going to have the opportunity to do that. Alexander is about to slam this door closed here. Sword Bearers of Mithrim going for a nice little rear charge here against the Hunters of Rathloriel, supported by, of course, that cavalry. Randirum and Togoland rapidly falling to about half of their number. Very ugly indeed. Those Elders of the Twilight Hearth probably backed up indeed by some Eagle-Eyed of Androth, really giving these Rangers the business. Scouts of Gelion over here are able to fire freely. I would definitely be moving them forward to try and take on the Eagle-Eyed of Androth, especially in a fairly close quarters range situation. Scouts of Gelion and their numbers and high damage are just going to come out on top easily. Spearhost of Gelion engaging this unit of Sword Bearers of Mithrim in CQB, trying to keep them out of the honeypot at the back of their lines. Meanwhile, the Green Elves seem to be in a little bit of a pickle here. That's kind of how it is for the Green Elves. You're not really going to win a lot of grind fights straight up. You're going to need to bring your ranged weapons to bear, your cavalry, and some of your more elite infantry if you can try and outflank things. But in a straight up fight like this, the Elves of Mithrim are going to have the advantage, and that certainly is on display here. Looks like some Bannerettes that hit their shore under Waffles being sent in around the main position, while the Shore Riders of Mithrim come crashing into the rear of the Urfinen Tower, one of the only infantry units of quality here, and that is going to be not great for the Green Elves. However, the Ents, Masters of Disruption and Destruction, charging in to the fray, and right here, this is going to be very ugly. Now, the Hewing Guildsmen are quite good against the Ents, it has to be said. The Ents have decent armor values, but of course it's going to get cut in half. Now the Twilight, or the Elders rather, of the Twilight Hearth, they're going to be pushing in here as well. They've got a whopping +6 versus Elephants, plus their mount bonus and base damage. That is certainly nothing to sneeze about, but the Ents, of course, have something very important. They have, of the Elephants, probably the highest attack radius. You can see that there. Not a lot of people are getting killed, but it is extremely disruptive from the front. There's nothing able to attack them in the back, so they have been deployed very, very well here, and I think they are probably going to be one of the more efficacious units on the battlefield today, thanks to some very clever deployment here from Tundra's Fox. He's got his rear nice and safe, and now these units are just able to come kick people to death from the front and disrupt all of those who could potentially cause them harm. That being said, Tundra's Fox has managed to circumvent the enemy position, and he is now behind the Green Elves, and he is certainly looking to give them the business. And that is going to of course, oblige Alexander and Waffles to respond and pull back some of their flanking units. Shore Riders of Mithrim, looks like they were going toe-to-toe with maybe some, oh yeah, you can see the red ruin of Scouts of Gelion they've left behind them. Going now for a nice little rear charge skirmish. Rathloriel are going to take it on the chin, and that is going to be very ugly indeed, despite the fact that they are not Lancer Cavalry. That's kind of how it is in Silmarillion. A lot of units are very melee defense heavy, and that's something that can help defend you against charges from the front, but they're quite armor light, and the Green Elves are no exception to that rule. And so it is going to hurt them quite a lot, going down from 94 or so to 58 models in just a matter of moments. very, very devastating. That payoff is certainly very, very strong. Bannerettes of the hither shore here. It looks like they managed to get into the honeypot in behind the Green Elven lines. And now Steward of Dale's army is slowly but surely beginning to crumble here. And that is going to continue to be the trend unless Tundra's Fox is able to come to his aid. And it looks like there's, well, a decent amount of supporting cavalry, such as Gelion, things like that, are nearby. Ooh, Lance of Adarant being activated here as these shore riders get into the fray with the horse archers. Shore riders of Mithrim down to a little bit less than half strength. Now they will put up a decent fight here. These are lancers and horse archers. They don't have any particularly strong bonuses against cavalry. We'll see how that ends up going for the Bannerettes of the hither shore, managing to get in to the scouts of Gelion. Excellent, excellent thing for the Grey Elven players. The sword bearers of Mithrim here being pinned in place and then shot to death by those scouts of Gelion. Pretty typical Green Elf tactics here. That's what a lot of those units are going to be for. Human Guildsmen, Scions of Mithrim have managed to break through the line. And over here, where the Ents are present, however, the Green Elves are managing to hold on, at least for a little while. That being said, it is complete chaos in the back lines here. So many dead archers, a whole bunch of Urfinen Tower, and a lot of dead horse archers as well. There's enemy cavalry running rampant all over the place. And the Lances of Adarant are and beating a hasty retreat here, going for a nice cheeky rear charge. Oh yeah, devastating. They may just be lancers, but oh, that's gotta hurt. I don't care who you are. Might be able to rout them off there. It's very, very likely. But let's see what's going on over here in the center of the battlefield. It looks like battle has been joined between Tundra's Fox and the Grey Elves contingents left behind to form sort of a rear guard under Alexander. And the Green Elves, thanks to some of their tankier and scarier units like the Mithrin and Tolgalen, and some beautiful enfilades here from Steward of Dale, who's just punishing these medium armored sentries of Mithrim with his rangers. And the Green Elves are actually poised to kind of break through here. It's just a matter of whether or not Stewie can hold out long enough for the rest of the Green Elves to get in behind the Elves of Mithrim here and crush them in a complete encirclement. Now let's pass on over to the eastern front here. It looks like battle has been joined between Tundra's Fox and the Elves here under Alexander 10Q. That being said, things don't appear to be going all that well for them. Now we can see some of those hidden units being mobilized. The Outlaws of Mithrim, they are two-handed spears, which makes them a potent anti-cavalry, anti-elephant unit, but they also have some throwing axes as well. There are 90 of them in the unit. They are, of course, unshielded and quite light, but they can hide anywhere, so it does kind of help them stay alive, and they can choose the opportune moment with which to engage. Now, in this kind of situation, moving them over here, maybe taking some pot shots at the Urfinen Tower, or a beautiful little enfilade into the Spearmen of Rathloriel. These Outlaws of Mithrim can get a ton of bang for their buck. They're also very cheap, and it's easy to bring quite a large number of them. You can see that Alexander 10Q here has brought the full contingent of 3 units of, and if they're able to get in behind here, both of those units at the same time, they would just absolutely destroy these Green Elf infantry. And it's looking like this, at least on this front over here in the east, things are going quite well for the Grey Elves. Now let's pop back on over to the other side, and it's sort of a nasty, bloody victory for nobody in particular, really. A lot of dead Mithrim Elves here, though they are slowly but surely managing to grind down the Green Elven host. Ooh, some nasty rear charges here. That should be enough to cause a little bit of routing here amongst the skirmishers of Rathloriel. We will certainly see, and what remains of the Bannerettes of the hither shore here being shot to death by those sentries of Gelion and who knows what else. Lancers of Adarant, still 31 strong, still in a pretty good position. If they could get, into the rear of a lot of these Human Guildsmen, this is a really, really juicy target here, and I'm sure Steward of Dale is going to try and capitalize on that. Look at those Ents, though, just kicking people to death. Not a whole lot that these elves can do to stop them when they're all bunched up and packed together like this. That being said, of course, the Human Guildsmen, if they can get in there, they'll be able to kill these guys up very quickly indeed. I think there might be some Scions mixed in here as well, which would give them an extra little bit of punch, which will certainly see these Ents here die very quickly. But look at the disruption there. All those foots just colliding here, kicking away, just creating a swath of red ruin, and dividing these Grey Elven hosts from one another. Essentially, the myth of Gelion, rather, going for a nice cheeky rear charge here. Skirmishes of Rathloriel barely managing to hold on, and indeed, they will break off here. Take a look at the percentages there. It's almost dead even. Some Steward of Dale's Rangers have managed to make it in to the rear here, trying to reinforce, and they're going to be able to charge down those Eagle-Eyed of Androth. See if they manage to do any decent damage. Probably not. Nope, didn't even get the charge bonus off. Very unfortunate for them. And still trying to kick people to death, trying to keep the whole host together. And meanwhile, over here, Tundra's Fox has managed to break through Alexander, and he is well poised to put many of these Grey Elves to rout. That being said, there are, I believe, yeah, the Grey Elves are in the ascendancy on the other side. Elves of Mithrim doing their best here to try and get some good shots off. I'm not too sure what's happening there with their firing arc. They can be a little bit particular, as many of the throwing weapons can. But I think if Alexander was maybe a little bit more patient here, he could definitely get some shots off into the Earthen Tower and turn that fight even more heavily in his favor. Elves of Mithrim doing their thing, running around. And these ones over here seem to be doing quite well, skewering many of the Earthen Tower. Those Forest Nobles are nothing to be trifled with. And it looks like somehow the Elves of Mithrim are starting to pull this back. Although, through sheer weight of numbers, I'm pretty sure, and quality as well, that the Green Elves are going to be able to break through there at this point. So not too much going in the Green Elves' favor over here, whereas in the center and over on the part of that eastern front, the Green Elves are basically destroying the Elves of Mithrim. Now, it is taking them a while to cut through a lot of those, shall we call them, premium chaff. A lot of mid-tier units, like I said, on that Mithrim roster is going to take a little while to crush those numbers and be able to free up enough troops to make a difference over here. And indeed, it is kind of over, at least over on this side, but it was a complete massacre from both sides. Now, the Green Elves of Mithrim did manage to come out on top here. There are one or two dead ends, but oh man, it's just destruction for both sides. A lot of cavalry, a lot of lives lost. Lance of Adarant somehow still alive, trying to take down the Bannerettes of the hidden shore. That might be. And indeed, that is the general there for Waffle, so he definitely wants to hightail it out of there. And of course, Steward of Dale is going to want to pursue him with those Lances of Adarant as far afield as he needs to, in order to get that cheeky rear charge. And this might be it. He might just take down the Elven General here. Let's find out. They didn't get their charge off. If they did, they probably would have skewered him from behind. It seems like there's some Sentries of Gelion here as well. Probably inflicting a little bit of friendly fire here, something you probably don't want to do. The Lances of Adarant can, of course, be very, very cheeky. We're going to see that here. A nice charge there, even 13 of them. It is going to make a difference and cut down quite a fair few of those Grey Elves, and that is going to give Steward of Dale's Spearmen here a chance to try and bring it back a little bit. Now, the Grey Elves, you can see, have obviously won this fight, and they've got the numbers, but they're looking very worse for wear. There's a lot of ragged units in here, and not many of them are even front-line units. The Eagle-Eyed of Androth, of course, are going toe-to-toe with the Spear Host of Gelion, and they're not exactly infantrymen, so they're not going to fare terribly well. Spear Host of Gelion, it must be said, has held their own fairly well, but I think now with this encirclement happening, they are indeed going to break, and that is going to free up a significant amount of Grey Elven resources. Keep doing that. I'm probably going to keep doing it too, so I apologize in advance. Let's see. Over here, ooh, Short Riders of Mithrim getting a beautiful rear charge here against the Kinsmen of Denethor. High tier spear unit, a bodyguard tier in fact, and they're going to kill like a third of that unit off in one nasty charge. Now, that being said, once those Kinsmen manage to turn around, they will inflict some minor losses on the remaining Short Riders, but they will be able to deftly skirt away, having inflicted some pretty substantial losses, about half or so of that unit's remaining strength. Super nasty, and they're definitely helped out a lot by that axe. Gives them just enough punch in, or rather off the charge, to be a pretty serious threat. Now, a little bit of Miss Micro here. It looks like these skirmishers of Wrath L'Oreal are going to be able to take the initiative away from those horsemen, and at the very least, drive them off, inflicting some minor casualties in the process. Green Elves are really struggling to get a piece of the ends here. I personally, if I was Alexander, I wouldn't be running away the Outlaws of Mithrim like this. They're very, very good at fighting fighting Ents and elephants and things like that. And they can inflict some pretty disproportionate damage, much more than you would think, given the nature of these units. That being said, Outlaws would probably have been routed off with the addition of the Spearmen of Wrath L'Oreal, so maybe that is the right call after all. Popping back over to the western front, and it looks like some of the fighting has shifted into the forest here. Now the Green Elves are trying to come to the aid of their beleaguered brothers over on the eastern side, and it looks like they're going to have the opportunity to get there potentially before this Mithrim force is wiped out. Although, you know what, maybe I spoke a little bit too soon. Scions of War, of course, are over here, and this is where they are. And if they can get a piece of those Ents, they will take them down quickly. Let's see. Let's see what they can do. And it just takes one or two good hits there, and they will bring down these monstrous beasts. Oh, one of the Mithrim generals getting kicked to death by one of the Ents. Scions of War not managing to bring down any of them that time, although they did get lucky over here and took down one of those Ents. Now the Green Elves are going to have to try and reform here. They've of course got more reinforcements from the Grey Elves in their rear. Skirmishers of Wrath L'Oreal getting a wonderful charge here that's going to help them mightily against the Outlaws of Mithrim. I think this unit is going to be not long for this world at all. You can see those Outlaws of Mithrim beginning to fall, but the addition of a full and fresh company of Scions of Mithrim, a little bit blobbed up here, probably needed to spread out a little bit more. With the addition of, this is going to take some time for the Green Elves to rid themselves of this threat. Spearmen of Wrath L'Oreal here. Oh, there goes the second Mithrim general. This could be really ugly for them, especially since many of these units are beginning to get tired. So some of the Green Elves here kind of took the initiative, tried to break up the advance and potentially deny these units their charge bonus, but the Human Guildsmen have got into the fray nonetheless, and the Green Elves are really going to struggle here. Decent heavy armor there that they just don't have an answer to, plus the huge shield value can make them very hard to break down. Meanwhile, over here, there's just enough sword units, and these spear units have taken, you know, some pretty substantial losses that I think that the Grey Elves should be able to turn this around, especially with the addition of some more reinforcements here in the form of Elders of Twilight Hearth and a couple units here of the Sentry Spearmen. Let's pop back on over to this side and see what, if anything, is happening. It looks like things have sort of concluded on this end. More ragged Mithrim reinforcements making their way over to the other side. I think they're being harangued a little bit by some of the Green Elves, but oh, so destructive over here. Yeah, these Green Elves running for their lives. These Sentries of Gelion deftly skirting around and taking pot shots here at these poor shield bearers of Mithrim. Still 12 of them remaining. And there goes one of the Green Elf generals. That's going to be ugly. Let's see if the Green Elf host here can manage to kind of keep themselves together. I think that was probably Tundrous Fox's general falling in that unit of Kinsmen of Denethor. Now would be a great time for the Green Elves, or rather the Grey Elves, to throw some cavalry into the rear of this line while they're still suffering from that initial morale shock of losing their commander. Human Guildsmen doing well, taking very light losses so far. And over here, the Scions of Mithrim, they're definitely going to win out against a very understrength unit of Skirmishers of Wrath L'Oreal who are also tired while they are merely active. So, yep, things are unraveling fast now, it would appear, for the Green Elves, but let's see if they can pull it back. I think if we look at the percentages here, it's still relatively even, what, a 7 or so % difference, and I think the Green Elves are going to be able to kind of bring that back a little bit with the Ents. Oh yeah, look at that. Look at the destruction and the disruption that they can cause here. Not a lot of those units are going to die off, but damn. Damn is it annoying. Yeah, the Scions of Mithrim getting kicked to death here as this fight begins to swing into the favor of the Elves of Mithrim. Scions of War, they have something to say about it. They're getting in there and engaging those Ents. Meanwhile, there's some throwing axes coming in. Potentially a little bit of a vain gesture, as the Ents have, I believe, about 14 or 16 or so armor, and it's only a 10 damage throwing projectile. That being said, sometimes you get lucky. And with this kind of combined arms approach here with these two Scions of War and more of these hewing guildsmen and stuff like that, bearing down on the rear of the Ents, their days could be numbered. It looks like Tundra's Fox is going to attempt to get out of there, and that's going to be the end of the skirmishes of Wrath L'Oreal. One of those Ents will get picked off, and this could be the end for them. Another one of the Ents going down to the Outlaws of Hithlum there, a combined force of Outlaws and hewing guildsmen, and boom, last Ent has fallen, and potentially with it, the opportunity for the Green Elves to get themselves back in this game. They've got a decent number of archers and things like that. A little bit of infantry still remaining, but yeah, very tired, wavering with the loss of their commander. This is, I think, going to go downhill extremely quickly. Still got some Sentries of Gellion in the back from Tundra's Fox. They probably still have ammunition, since I think they've been under strength for a large portion of this game. What have we got over here? Urfinen Tower, unable to link up with the rest of the army. Some Spearmen of Wrath L'Oreal getting charged in the rear by the Shield Bearers of Mithrim. They are going to break almost immediately. They're very, very tired, and they have lost their commander. Urfinen Tower, however, are more than mere mortals, and they will fight to the bitter, bitter end here. But a vain gesture it will ultimately be, as there are just too few of them left to really make a difference. Let's go ahead, kick things up into full speed here. Shore Riders managing to break a significant detachment of Spearmen of Wrath L'Oreal. Let's see. Do the Green Elves just have anything left here? Do they have any additional cards left to play? It doesn't look like it. Let's see how things are going over here. Yeah, looking at the percentages, it seems like the Green Elves are kind of on their last legs here. And I'm thinking that this one is going to go to Mithrim. It was very much a Pyrrhic battle, though. Lost about 90 or so % of their overall force. And what you see here is basically what's left of both armies of Alexander and Waffles. They supported each other quite nicely, managed to cut their way through the Green Elves, really put a lot of pressure on them, especially with those Shore Riders of Mithrim. I think we really got a nice showcase of how versatile that cavalry unit can be. They are, of course, quite fragile, and in a straight fight with anything but, you know, Green Elven skirmish cavalry or Lancer cavalry, they will not necessarily come out on top. But that charge bonus is huge for them, as is their missile damage, and that just really makes all the difference in the world. Let's see. Do we still have any of the Green Elves still remaining? There's a few Shore Riders here who are going toe-to-toe with those sentries, and they are just knocking it out of the park here, aren't they? There's 4 of them still remaining, and they're almost immediately going to get cut down, I think. Sentries of Gellion running away with a meager 4 men still remaining. Gonna try and get some distance here. I think they're going to get interrupted before they can ultimately whip out their swords and try and defend themselves. 3 of them dying in very short order. And that one archer. Let's see if he's going to manage to get himself away here. Probably not. He's going to get cut down. Boom, he is gone. And that is about 98% of the Green Elf force sent to the field today. And it's very, very bloody. Extremely destructive conflict over here. Over here was just nasty as hell. A really cool game, though. Nice to see both teams having experienced players who know, fairly well how to work together. We saw Stuart O'Dale getting a decent amount of support from Tundra's Fox. Looks like a little clash happened over here on this particular little muddy strand as the Green Elves tried to force their way through. But Tundra's Fox supported his ally well. Waffles and Alexander supported each other as well. each other well. They use the terrain well. And ultimately they managed to come out on top against one of the most competitive factions in the mod, which I think says a lot about the state of Mithrim. They feel quite balanced from what I've seen and the little that I've played with them as well. Yeah, they seem like a pretty solid all-around faction. So well done to Stewart of Dale, who actually designed that faction. So he was playing against his sort of brainchild today. Let's see how the Elves of Mithrim managed to do. Now this is going to be Stewart's army, Scions of War, of course the bowmen and things like that are going to be where a lot of your kills come from. Not a lot was really done with the Outriders of Dweilwyn. We saw them, go from 50 to 30 models as they tried to circumvent the Mithrim line, get behind them, and really start to inflict some damage there. They were just shut down a little bit too early on. Kinsmen of Denethor did okay. I mean, normally that's a unit that you can count on to get over 100 kills despite being a spear unit. But I think they ended up just getting pummeled by some nasty cavalry that unfortunately caught Stewart of Dale sleeping, so he was not able to turn around at the right time. Urfinen Tower only getting about 95, 96. Those are units that are capable of getting a hell of a lot more. But they were just shut down a little bit early, and I think many of them were whittled down before they even managed to hew any necks in melee at all. Randurum from Stewart of Dale did really well, 166 kills, can't go wrong there. Scouts of Gelion, of course, 146, 78 from the other unit, a little bit disappointing. A lot of middling performance here, and there was a few little standout acts as well. Tundra's Fox, now this is where it gets interesting. Kinsmen of Denethor did not do very well. Spear Host of Gelion, one of them did okay, 62, but the rest of them kind of just got shot to death with 533 kills on those Ents. Very, very nasty, and a lot of that really comes down to, I think, how Tundra's Fox ultimately opted to use those units. As I pointed out a little bit earlier on, he kept his back to his allied troops, and then used that really high and disruptive radius to just attack and kick his way through the front lines. And the enemy really couldn't do anything about it because of just how many and how disruptive those incoming kicks, raining down blows upon them, can be. Skirmishers of Rathloriel, some of them did really well, some of them did, fairly well, but 135 kills from a unit of Skirmishers of Rathloriel is definitely tops. It's not a super expensive unit, only mid-tier, and yeah, really can see a little bit of that performance from those units coming out here today. Spearmen of Rathloriel did okay. One of them got 93, it's quite impressive. One of his Urfinen Tower, however, only managed to get 25, and his Randurum just got absolutely destroyed. And the Mythern did not too badly, especially given that there are 80 models in the unit. So both sides, had their ups and downs, but there was a lot of really expensive units, Urfinen Tower, and things like that just didn't end up pulling their weight. Randurum and Tol Galen, now it's a relatively expensive unit. I think it's about 750, maybe 800 or so gold. And that just kind of went down the drain there. Only about 4 or so kills. They barely managed to get a shot off. Really, really unfortunate there for Tundra's Fox. So, well played to both sides. Alexander 10Q and his ally Waffles managed to come out on top in that game. I think they played really well. I think that this was ultimately a really cool showcase of a new faction and their strengths and their weaknesses and things like that. So hope you guys enjoyed this game so far. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. I hope you guys will join me next time. If you have any questions, concerns, or you just want to tell us how much you love the new Mithrim faction, make sure that you do so down below in the comment section. Peace out. I will see you next time.